Imagine for a second living just a completely, utterly ordinary life in the American Midwest. You water your lawn, you pay your taxes.
You wave to your neighbors.
Yeah, exactly. You wave to the neighbors, you celebrate your 64th birthday. You're just a normal fixture in your community.
Right.
But then, 800 miles away, a microscopic drop of sweat, like literally a drop of sweat that you left in a dark forest 36 years ago, is suddenly uploaded to a server.
It's terrifying when you really think about it.
It is, because it triggers this digital tripwire that is about to just completely end your life as you know it. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
If you're listening to this, you probably want to understand the larger forces shaping stories like this, without getting bogged down by just a massive avalanche of disjointed facts.
Right, the information overload is real.
Oh, for sure. So today, we're pulling from a really incredible piece of investigative journalism titled Justice in the Smallest Strand.
And I have to say, the source material here forces us to confront some pretty uncomfortable realities.
Yeah, it really does.
It requires us to look at the severe limits of human patience, the relentless, almost terrifying march of scientific progress, and honestly, a very sobering truth about our criminal justice system.
Absolutely. So our mission today for this deep dive is to trace how a 36-year-old cold case was finally cracked by modern science.
The science is just mind-blowing.
It really is. But as we get into the mechanics of this breakthrough, we're also going to examine the complex, sometimes really messy reality of what closure actually means. Because, real life rarely gives us that perfect cinematic ending.
It rarely does. I mean, to understand the magnitude of the scientific leap that happened in 2026, we really first need to establish the baseline of the era.
Right. Take us back.
So the source takes us back to West Houston. It's a humid August night in 1990.
Okay.
Two young people, 22-year-old Cheryl Henry and 21-year-old Andy Atkinson, are out for the evening. The recording describes them as young, happy, in love.
Just enjoying late night drives.
Yeah, exactly. So on August 22nd, after visiting a local bar, they drive out to this secluded, wooded spot near Eldridge Parkway. The locals called it Lover's Lane.
That kind of setting, it's almost an archetype in American true crime narratives.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a secluded area where young people seek privacy, but they're unintentionally isolating themselves from any potential help or witnesses. It creates this vulnerability that, unfortunately, predators specifically seek out.
That's spot on. And by the morning of August 23rd, they are completely gone.
Just vanished.
Yeah. And then the next day, police make a horrifying discovery deep in the woods near Enclave Parkway. Both Cheryl and Andy are found bound and brutally stabbed to death.
That's just awful.
The source explicitly notes that the sheer brutality of this crime scene shocked even the veteran, hardened investigators.
I mean, when reading about the abruptness of this violence, it's like a record scratching, right? Two young lives full of music just suddenly halted. It feels less like a traditional narrative and more like a time capsule of violence.
A time capsule, exactly.
The moment they were killed, everything just froze in place. But given that the crime scene showed signs of a violent struggle, doesn't that almost guarantee the killer left something of themselves behind?
Yes, it absolutely does. From a forensic standpoint, that time capsule aspect you mentioned is crucial.
Right.
The binding, the stabbing that points to a highly chaotic, physical, intimate method of murder, it requires really close contact.
Which means biology, right? Like sweat, blood. So I want to push back a little on the initial investigation, though.
Sure.
If the scene was that violent, and the police knew a significant physical struggle occurred, why were they at such a complete dead end?
That's the big question.
Right, because even in 1990, investigators knew to look for blood and hair. If they had physical evidence from the struggle, why did it take almost 4 decades to make an arrest?
Well, because possessing the evidence and possessing the capability to actually decode it are two entirely different scientific realms.
Okay.
In 1990, forensic DNA technology was essentially in its infancy. The primary method used back then was called RFLP.
RFLP. What does that actually mean for a detective on the ground?
Basically, it required a massive amount of high-quality biological material to generate a profile. We're talking about needing a visible pool of blood,
Wow.
or a biological sample roughly the size of a quarter.
Meaning microscopic sweat, or just a few stray skin cells left on a victim's clothing that would be completely useless to a detective in 1990.
Completely useless. They could collect a shirt that clearly had the killer's sweat on it, but they just couldn't read the genetic map it contained.
That is so frustrating.
It is. They were holding a puzzle with pieces so small they couldn't even be seen with the naked eye, let alone put together.
Right.
And that is why the unspoken heroism of forensic work in that era was meticulous preservation.
So it's less like a locked safe and more like having this highly encrypted hard drive, but existing in an era before computers were even invented.
Oh, that's a highly accurate way to view it.
The data is there, but the machine to read it just doesn't exist yet.
Okay, well, let's unpack this a bit.
It's maddening to think the answer was literally sitting in a cardboard box the entire time. How do investigators keep a case alive when all the leads are totally dead?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the investigators in 1990 had to act with immense foresight.
Like planning for a future they couldn't see?
Exactly. They had to collect, dry, seal, and log biological material, knowing their current technology was entirely inadequate.
Wow.
They operated on this scientific faith that someday, maybe decades in the future, technology would eventually catch up to the crime scene.
That takes so much patience.
It really does. The physical evidence itself didn't change over those 36 years. The biological material in the Houston evidence locker remained exactly what it was on that humid August night.
Right.
The lens we used to view it is what changed.
But I mean, the psychological toll of that waiting period must just be devastating.
Unimaginable.
The source text describes months of intense investigation turning into absolutely nothing. The killer just vanishes. Detectives who work the scene eventually retire. They turn their notes over to new generations of police.
And the families are just left there.
Yeah, left in this awful limbo for over 3 decades. How do families even begin to process a wait like that?
Psychologists actually refer to this specific state as ambiguous loss.
Ambiguous loss. Okay.
Yeah, it's a unique type of grief where there's no closure or clear understanding of the event. The families know their loved ones were murdered, but the narrative is permanently incomplete.
Like, who did this? Why were they targeted?
Right. Is the killer someone in our own neighborhood?
God, that's a terrifying thought.
It is, and that profound lack of resolution prevents the natural grieving process from moving forward. It basically freezes the families in the exact same emotional time capsule as the crime scene itself.
And the actual identity of the killer was just sitting in a cardboard box on a shelf the entire time they were grieving.
Just waiting.
It fundamentally redefines how we should view cold cases. I mean, we tend to think of homicide investigations as these aggressive, active pursuits.
Right, kicking down doors.
Exactly. But there is this entirely different, agonizing discipline, the science of waiting.
But that dormant period eventually hits an expiration date.
Thank goodness.
And for Cheryl and Andy's case, that date was 2026. The physical limits of 1990 finally collided with modern genetic databases.
Walk me through the mechanics of that shift. How did forensic science go from needing a quarter-sized blood sample to making this massive breakthrough?
Well, the evolution moved from requiring those large, intact cellular samples to what the scientific community calls touch DNA.
Okay, touch DNA.
Yes. Combined with amplification techniques like polymerase chain reaction or PCR.
I've heard of PCR.
Right. By 2026, scientists no longer needed a pool of blood. They could take microscopic cellular fragments, literally just the shed skin cells left behind when the killer bound the victim.
Skin cells.
Just skin cells. And they could multiply that DNA like a biological photocopier until they possessed a fully readable genetic profile.
Oh, wow. So investigators reopen the Houston evidence. They apply these modern amplification techniques to the tiny biological traces from the 1990 scene, and boom, they get a clean profile.
They do.
But a genetic profile is essentially just a long string of complex data, unless you have someone to actually compare it to, right?
Exactly. And that's where the second major advancement comes in. The creation of interconnected national databases like CODIS.
Right, CODIS.
In 1990, local police departments were super isolated. A crime in Texas stayed in Texas.
They weren't talking to each other.
Exactly. But by the mid-2020s, you have these massive cross-referenced digital networks.
So when investigators uploaded this newly amplified 1990 profile into the modern system,
they weren't just checking Houston records anymore, they were searching the entire country.
and it triggered a match.
It triggered a match.
The source emphasizes this wasn't a match out of thin air either. The DNA matched a profile collected from a 1996 sexual assault case.
Right.
Decades of complete mystery just collapsed into a single notification on a computer screen. It pointed directly to a 64-year-old man named Floyd William Parrott, who was living hundreds of miles away in Lincoln, Nebraska.
And this is that digital tripwire in action. Parrott left his biological signature in Houston in 1990, and he left it somewhere else during an assault in 1996.
And he just thought he got away with it.
He spent the next 30 years assuming he had completely outsmarted the system. He benefited heavily from the vast geographical size of the country and the severe limitations of 20th century police communication.
So here's where it's really interesting. On March 25, 2026, the waiting ends. An FBI SWAT team surrounds his home in Nebraska.
After 36 years.
Yeah, 36 years. He is arrested and charged with capital murder. The source notes the extreme emotional whiplash for Cheryl and Andy's families.
I can't even imagine.
A wound that had been wide open since 1990 suddenly had a face attached to it. But something I'm really struggling to reconcile is the camouflage aspect of his life.
How he blended in.
Right. How does someone violently bind and stab two young people and then just move to Nebraska and spend the next 3 decades acting like an ordinary citizen?
What's fascinating here is that we have this deep cultural conditioning that tells us violent predators should look like monsters.
Like they should be glaringly obvious.
Exactly. We expect them to constantly radiate danger. But the terrifying reality of serial offenders is their absolute reliance on integration.
They blend in.
They blend in perfectly. They move to new cities, pay their taxes, wave to their neighbors, hold down ordinary jobs.
Just going to the grocery store like everybody else.
Yes. But DNA strips that camouflage away entirely. You can change your name, you can age 36 years, you can move across the country.
But you can't change your DNA.
Your biological blueprint is immutable. When the databases finally became sophisticated enough to talk to each other across state lines and across decades, his ordinary life in Nebraska was dismantled in an instant.
The arrest felt like the climactic victory, But reading further into the source, catching the suspect did not tie the story up cleanly.
No, not at all.
Parrott wasn't just a man who committed a horrific act in his youth and then, reformed. Authorities dug into his past and revealed a very dark, very troubling criminal history.
Yeah, that 1996 sexual assault match was an indicator of a much larger behavioral pattern.
Right.
The deeper investigators looked, the more they uncovered a systemic methodology of predatory behavior.
And the reporting specifically highlights that his history involved weapons and, crucially, impersonating law enforcement officers.
Which is chilling.
When I read that detail, a very cold realization hit me. We're talking about Cheryl and Andy parked on a dark, secluded road late at night.
In Lover's Lane.
Right. I kept wondering how one person physically controls 2 young, healthy adults. It makes terrifying sense if he approached their car looking and acting like a police officer.
It's a profound manipulation of social trust.
Yeah.
If a stranger approaches your vehicle in the woods at night, your biological instinct is flight. You start the engine and you leave.
Get out of there immediately.
Exactly. But if that stranger flashes a badge, uses a spotlight, or speaks with the assumed commanding authority of law enforcement,
You suppress your survival instinct.
you comply, you roll down the window, you might even step out of the vehicle when ordered. The predator weaponizes the victim's own civic compliance against them.
It speaks to a highly calculated predatory methodology. The investigators even announced they feared there could be other hidden victims out there in the shadows of his past.
It's highly likely.
So the families of Cheryl and Andy, they finally have this information. They have the arrest, they understand the methodology, and they're bracing for a trial.
Right, they want their day in court.
They were preparing for a chance to finally confront him in a courtroom.
But that courtroom confrontation never materializes. The legal process is suddenly short-circuited.
Just weeks after the SWAT raid in Nebraska, reports emerged that Floyd William Parrott died in jail.
Before he could even face a judge.
He dies before he can ever stand trial. The source lists what is permanently lost in that moment. No courtroom confession, no public testimony, and no final explanation for why 2 young lives were targeted and taken on that lonely road. Just silence.
This raises an important question, really, about a fascinating and devastating philosophical dilemma regarding the nature of the justice system.
How so?
Well, we are deeply conditioned by media and society to view justice as a courtroom verdict.
Right, the gavel banging.
Exactly. We expect a judge reading a sentence and the perpetrator forced to sit there, face the families, and answer for their crimes.
The grand moment of accountability. We expect the perpetrator to have to verbally acknowledge the destruction they caused.
But Parrott's death creates this deeply fragmented resolution. The families are forced to hold 2 completely conflicting realities at the exact same time.
Which are?
On one side, they possess the undeniable scientific certainty of the DNA match. The WHO, is completely and permanently solved. There's no ambiguity about his guilt.
But the sudden death denies them the why. And the why is usually the linchpin for actual emotional healing.
Exactly.
Without the trial, they will never know what led him to Lover's Lane that night.
It leaves the families with scientific resolution but zero narrative explanation. Parrott took the specific details of that night and his internal motivations straight to the grave.
That's just so bleak.
The definitive victory belongs entirely to the forensic science, while the emotional ledger for the families remains permanently unbalanced. It forces us as a society to ask what closure truly means when the legal system is suddenly removed from the equation. Can a microscopic strand of DNA provide enough closure to heal a 36-year wound?
It's a heavy, complicated place to land, but I think it brings us back to the core mission of this deep dive. When you listen to stories about cold cases or read about them in the news, it's so easy to file them away as just forgotten history, just dusty boxes in a basement storage facility somewhere.
But this case proves they are anything but history.
Right.
They are active waiting rooms for scientific advancement.
The investigators in 1990 did their job by meticulously preserving the evidence, trusting a future they couldn't even visualize yet.
They really did.
The source material captures the reality perfectly. Cold cases never truly sleep, and justice sometimes waits patiently in the smallest strand of DNA.
Which leaves us with a haunting thought to consider long after this deep dive ends.
What's that?
We just explored how tiny, invisible biological traces left on a dark Houston road in 1990 were finally decoded by the unimaginable technology of 2026.
Right.
36 years of scientific evolution turned the invisible into the undeniable. So, what seemingly meaningless, invisible evidence is being unknowingly left behind at crime scenes today? What microscopic secrets are currently sitting in evidence rooms right now, just waiting for the forensic technology of 2050 to make them visible?